I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 20 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. On the show today, Mitchell Pickford shares his perspective on the beer world, his journey and experience starting the new Brisbane Brewery, Range Brewing. I was connected to Mitch through a mutual friend of ours, Matt O'Malley, who recently took the title for the Husk Distillery Tea Punch Masters competition. Highly recommending I talk to Mitch, who absolutely delivers. Enjoy and cheers.
Hello and welcome to the show, Mitch.
Thanks for having me, man.
No worries at all, mate. No worries at all. The way that I like to start the show is by asking if you have a crazy hospitality story.
Got a few, but there's always one that sticks in my mind. It's probably the funniest, hands down thing I've ever seen in a venue.
Yeah.
So I used to work at Archive Beer Boutique under Chris Kempnish, who now works for Young Henrys. He was the boss man there, and one night we have live music there. One night we had this guy get up on stage and he's like, I'm going to sing. And I was just like, what is going on here? It's like everyone's just got this guy he was quite drunk. And we're like, what is this guy doing? Like, who is this guy? And then we looked at closer and it is the lead singer of Wolfmother. And we're like, is this really happening? Or is this like a funny thing? And then we're like, no man, like you got to leave. Like you're really drunk. You can't be here. You've got to go. Tried to get him to go. Got the security there. Refused to leave.
Yeah.
He did a sit down. Like he sat down on the floor, refused to leave.
No.
Didn't on them.
Like a kid.
Like a classic kid's
tantrum.
He
Like
was
loose arms.
Yeah, he was sitting there going, do you know who I am? We're just like, mate, we don't care. You are blind. You need to go. And so it ended up being like, had to ring Kempy and be like, mate, can you come downstairs and get this guy?
Wow.
Kempy's a big dude. Kempy just legitimately like picked him up off the floor, carried him out the front and sat him down out the front and went, cool man, and just left. And you're like, all right. That just happened.
Yeah, jeez. Man, thanks for that story. Oh, I like that. That is a good way to kick it off. The next question I'd like to ask you is why you do what you do.
Man, when it comes to brewing beer, that's what I do. It's just purely the love of beer. I started off my life as a carpenter. Loved doing things with my hands. Loved building. But unfortunately, I had an injury to my knee whilst I was at work, and couldn't do it anymore. So I was working in bars at the same time. Started working at Archive, and just progressed from there to love beer a lot more than I already did. And when you love beer that much and you're working in a place that actually sells a lot of beer, I was like, well, I want to learn how to make it. And then I learned how to make it, and I was like, well, this is my next step of doing something with my hands. So I was creating something that I loved, but also using my hands that I already loved to do.
And you get to drink it too.
Yeah, well, can't really
That's a
complain.
bonus.
Yeah.
What is it about beer that inspires you, that gets you really excited?
It's ever changing. That's one of the coolest things ever. It was the thing that got me to go from like my building mentality, where I was like, well, I can build these beautiful things, I can do a house, I can do a kitchen, I can do all these things, I can do furniture, but does it ever truly evolve unless I'm, creating it myself, like creating the architecture? Not really. So when I'm creating a beer, like I can legitimately make anything I really want. And it's down to me, which is pretty cool. So for me, it was just the changing world of beer and the way that I could influence the beer myself. So everybody says, a lot of people say that yeast make beer because it creates your alcohol in beer, and without the alcohol, beer isn't beer really. But the influence of the person behind that beer is a huge thing, and that was the one thing that I really liked about it.
So what are you doing now to influence the beer industry?
The beer industry for us now as well, in the not really the early, we're in the latter stages of starting my own brewery with a couple of good friends of mine. Matt McGyver and Jared Martin. We're starting up our own brewery called Range Brewing in Newstead, in Brisbane. So for us, we want to take our influences from design, culture, myself in the building industry, the beer culture itself, not just in Australia, but around the world. We've all spent a lot of time around the world and in a lot of different beer cultures around the world. And just a way of life in general, and bring that together. And bring it together in a way where we think people aren't really getting it right in the beer market in Australia, or adapting themselves to these types of areas in the beer market in Australia.
Mm-hmm. So what are people doing wrong, or what can they be doing better?
I don't think people do too many things wrong. There's just things that I like and things that other people like, and everybody tends to do things for their own reasons, and it generally boils back to what they want to do, what they like, and what they've been influenced to do something like that for. For Australian beer, our quality as a whole needs to go up, and that's more talking at a smaller guys in the industry. Like the big guys have fantastic facilities to create beautiful beer, wonderful beer, and I'm not just talking about big guys like Cup United or someone like that, or 4X, someone like that. They have like the best facilities in the world because they are owned by big companies, and those big companies can pump a lot of money into them to make sure that their processes and their equipment are perfect so they can make perfect beer. Guys like Stonewood have heavily invested in their laboratory work and their equipment to make sure that those guys are producing very, very good beer, although very different to guys like 4X and everyone like that. Still on a large scale there, Stonewood now definitely on a large scale, but they're making sure that their beer stays the same on a large scale, but also in the right way, which is really cool.
Yeah, so you said quality has to increase in Australia. Can you tell us a bit more about that, and how can a brewery increase its quality?
Quality is more derived from just meticulous, I call it like dot work, where I'm sitting there taking notes all day, just writing dots, writing dot points, just smashing out. So everything I do has to have a process, has to have a reason for that process, and then it has to have fail-safe on that process. So, it has to all boil back to why am I doing this process? And if the quality control is in that, then there has to be a very big reason for it. The beer industry in Australia, especially the smaller part of the beer industry in Australia, so the independent beer industry in Australia, a lot of these guys are just like, man, I'm just making beer, like I'm making craft beer, I'm making this. Well, at the end of the day, like you can make craft beer all you want, but if you're not making good beer, it doesn't really matter. So, and that's a great initiative that the industry itself, the Independent Brewers Association, is now starting to see and actually develop in our industry, which is a really, really good thing. They're starting to take note that we have had a massive influx of small breweries start to pop up, but that they need to start producing the quality of beer that we can make sustainable in our industry, which is good.
Awesome. Well, you brought up something there. It's a question that I asked Matt Kierkegaard. What makes a good beer?
Listen to that. So that's good. He had a good response to it as well. Good beer is dependent on each person, really. So that's my opinion. It's really, really hard to give a broad explanation of a good beer. But for mine, beer should not have a defect unless the beer is designed to have one. So if you're making a sour beer, it has Brettanomyces in it. Which in a normal beer, a Brettanomyces is a defect.
And that's a yeast.
Yeah, that's sour yeast. Sorry for someone.
Yes, that's okay.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd explain.
Yeah, that's cool. So beer without defect is a clear indicator of a good beer, but it's not necessarily mean that the beer is good. Is it flavorful? Has it got good carbonation? Is the color right for its style of beer? All these types of things. They can all be contributors to a good beer. For me, good beer is beer that tastes the way it's meant to. And in that way, I'll elaborate a little bit more. It's a bit shallow, but so if I read a label on a beer and I say this beer is a West Coast IPA, and I taste that beer and it tastes like a West Coast IPA, I'm like, good job, man. That's a good beer.
Yeah, cool.
That's the easiest way I can describe it, because people always sit there and go, oh, it has to be this, it has to be that. I was like, well, what does the label say? Does it say it's this kind of IPA? Does it say it's this one? Does it say it's a pale ale, American pale ale, Australian, New Zealand, whatever? I was like, if it says that on the label, and then you taste that beer, and it is exactly that, good job. Good job, man. You make a good beer.
On that note though, what if a brewery wants to innovate a little bit and there's no category for the beer that they want to create? It doesn't taste like what it says on the label. Is that a bad beer?
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing. So that's a really good point. And it's something that I learned quite well at Stone and Wood when I worked there. I did work there for some time.
Mm-hmm.
These guys, when they first started making beer, they made 2 beers. They made draft ale, and they made their lager. And their draft ale is now the Pacific Ale. That particular beer never had a style, and that's why it was called Pacific Ale. Because their whole motto with that beer was to make the beer for the Byron Bay area.
Mm.
You know, what they tried to corner a market is what they did. It was strategic and it was smart, and they're bloody successful now because of it.
Mm.
They made a beer for the people of Byron Bay and the things that they love to do there. Everyone likes to go to the beach.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone likes to have a beer on a hot day. So if you're coming out of the beach on a hot day, what was the perfect beer you could want in a kind of tropical setting to drink? And that's what they did. And that's why I'm a huge believer in beer doesn't have to be brewed to style. If you say something is that style, then you need to brew it to that style. But if you say something's a Pacific Ale, never was a style, they kind of just made a beer to fit a market.
Invent your own.
Yeah, well, it's a kind of thing like that. A lot of people are sticklers for styles and things like that. Me myself, I'm not so much a stickler for a style of beer. Like, I like beer in many different settings. I like beer at many different times, with different foods, with different elements, with different people. And at the end of the day, I choose beer based on that. I don't really choose beer based on style. I do choose beer a lot if I know the beer's good and I've already had it, which I do generally quite a lot. But yeah, not so much on the styles of beers themselves. I think it's a bit not overrated, but it just doesn't matter to me that much. So
yeah, awesome. Just want a quick note on beer. Just want to thank the fellas at Green Beacon for the beers we're having now.
Nice
little cheers there.
Nice little half mast.
Yeah, cheers.
Absolute legends over in Green
Lovely.
Beacon.
You spent a little bit of time overseas recently.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, cool. So, well, I used to be the head brewer of Cashman Brewing Co. in West End, and I made a decision to leave them after talking with some friends of mine about an opportunity to go overseas and work at some breweries. So what I did was I actually organised to work at 3 different breweries, and I ended up going to 4. So I worked at Gypsy Hill, which is they're in Gypsy Hill, which is part of Crystal Palace, south of London. I worked at Wiper and True in Bristol, and then I worked at Basque Brewing Co. in San Sebastian in Spain. Tough place to go work, I know, really tough. And then I went up to Lervik in Norway, in Stavanger.
Right.
So that was just a fortunate circumstance, that one, but it was absolutely incredible. So that was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Well.
So what did you do at the breweries there?
So for me, it was a learning trip. I was working in a week at all these places. So the first place I went to was out at Bristol, and I was working with Will Hartley, their head brewer, and their brew team, Flo, Amanda, and Will. A different Will, 2 Wills. And I was working with them every day, and it was just a way for me to see a different side of production and development for what they do for their processes, their brewing, their recipes, their yeast cultivation, all these types of things, even in the way they use different ingredients and how they're using them. So legitimately, it was just like throwing myself into someone else's brewery, picking their brains and learning why they are doing the things that they're doing. And then it was for me to try and adapt that and see what they were doing well that I could think about and go, well, you know what, I could really use that. I could really use that type of development. And that's what happened at all these places. So I spent a week with them, and they were fantastic. That was absolutely wonderful, and they were doing some extremely different things to what I've seen in Australia. They were using very different equipment to what I was used to. And the best part about it was they were just so inviting and happy and friendly. And
Just what beer's about.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. The beer culture is absolutely incredible. And everyone's generally so inviting. In Australia, I don't think we're inviting enough, personally. I think breweries themselves, they're starting to change now. If we're talking brewers to brewers, in Brisbane, Southeast Queensland and Northern New South Wales, we have a general really nice respect for each other, the brewers here that know each other quite well. We talk to each other, we help each other. If someone's running low on ingredients, like they ask us and they go, "Oh, do you have any spare ones?" We go, "Yeah, man, go for your life." You know, they're going to replace it the next week. You know, if they want to come, if they come into your brewery and they ask you about a process that you're doing and why you're doing it, you tell them. Like, because at the end of the day, you're only going to help the industry, and that's a huge thing that I learned in Europe that these guys are doing over there way better than we are in Australia, which was pretty cool. And that's a wonderful thing about the beer industry.
They help each other more.
Yeah, they definitely do. They definitely do. They tend to not hold back whatsoever. Like, you know, apart from recipes, people aren't going to give away their recipes, you know, but I could give someone the recipe to Stonewood Pacific Ale today. Like, I still remember it off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean they're going to be able to make it, because it's the processing and the development of that actually make the beer. So for those guys over there, they just try to help each other. So they help the industry grow, which overall, you know, helps their beer sell, because they are helping their own industry grow, which is cool.
Tell us a bit more about the other breweries you worked with.
So Gypsy Kills down there with JT and Simon, Adzi, the other guys. These guys were absolutely incredible to go work for. So I worked there for a week, didn't brew a beer, whereas the other places all I did was brew beer. So for these guys, it was a whole different world for me, because they were actually building and upgrading their new brewery. So I got to see them build, replace and input all these new systems, and I was just sitting there going, this is unbelievable. Like, I kegged beer, which was great, I bottled beer, which was great, but watching them actually put together these different areas of their brewery was absolutely wonderful. And Simon and JT are both they are both actual engineers themselves, so they did a lot of it themselves. They actually, you won't see this very often anywhere in the world, really, except for I've seen it a little bit at Stonewood, because they have a big enough team, an engineering team, to do it. But not many places will do this. Scotty Hargrave actually did a bit of it at Bolter with their glycol, which was super impressive. But yeah, these guys just like ordered everything and then put it all together themselves. They were doing the welding, they were doing the casting. Like, they were doing absolutely everything themselves, and I was just sitting there going, how good is this? Like, these guys are using their previous traits, you know, to help build their own new brewery. And it was a big scale too, so it was 60 hectolitre brew house, which is 6,000 litre brew house. And then they added 5 new bright tanks, and they had 320 hectolitres. So, you know, it's just a lot of beer, man. It's like, you know, 12,000 litres of beer. That's a lot of beer. So yeah, it was pretty cool. So it wasn't a small upgrade by any means. But yeah, they're doing really well, and they're just trying to advance their brewery to the stage where they actually can keep up with their production, which is a pretty cool thing.
Right.
So that was cool.
And then next?
Basqueland Brewing in San Sebastian. Wonderful place, wonderful part of the world. Recommended to anyone.
Yeah.
It's cool. Unbelievable culture in just that area in general. Wine, food, beer, everyone loves it. But these guys are really the first sort of larger independent brewery to really come in and take a hold on Spain. So everyone goes gangbusters for them. They absolutely love their IPA. IPA wasn't really a big thing in Spain until these guys started making American IPAs. So the good thing with them is the three guys there, the 2 bands and KP, they're all California boys. So they have a good background in the California beer scene. Benny Matz, Jerry, a good friend of mine, their brewer, head brewer. He formerly works at some big guys like Stone. So, you know, that's when you've got knowledge like that and you can bring it to a different culture and a different space and actually influence them the way they have. It was absolutely incredible to see. And they were just making, you know, pretty normal beers that you'd see anywhere in Australia. Well, nowadays anyway in Australia, like they're just making like really nice IPAs, really nice wheat beers, really nice pale ales. Not doing anything too crazy. Like made a Gosa over there, and that was pretty awesome as well. But other than that, man, they're just really on point with everything they did. So they made really good beer all the time, and the consistency and the quality was incredible. And that's one thing I was just like, yeah, like this is bang on. This is what you want. If you're coming into a new market, you can't be lackluster. You want to be good. You want to set a benchmark, and I was like, that's excellent from there.
Awesome. So that was your 3rd week, and then your 4th week was Norway.
Yeah. So I actually finished my trip, my work trip at San Sebastian, but the last beer that we bottled there was a collab that they did with Lervik, who were from Stavanger in Norway, And these guys weren't going to be able to get the beer, and I was already going to Norway. So I was like, oh, well, man, I'll put something in my suitcase and I'll bring it up to you. It'll be sweet. I'm already going there. So I did, and I went up there and saw Dave and Mike. Mike's head brewer and one of the co-founders, absolute legend. His name's Mike Murphy, and then Dave, their brewer, their head brewer now. Yeah, but these guys were a whole different other level. So they're brewing on a 200 hectoliter brew kit. So they're brewing on 20,000 litre scale. But they were making, the day that I went there, they were making a 8.8% New England IPA on a 20,000 litre scale. And I was just sitting there just going, how on earth are you going to be able to sell that? Like, this is a niche beer.
Yeah.
How on earth do you sell it? He goes, it's already sold. We've already sold it all. It's already sold before they even got it in the tank. I was just like, this is like blowing my mind.
All locally? Or?
So just around Europe, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with the alcohol laws in Norway, they're pretty strict. They're actually more strict than Australia. Most people won't believe that, but that's an actual thing. They tend to send they sell their normal core range of beers. They make a lager, they make a really nice Berliner Weiss, pale ale, grapefruit pale ale, stuff like that. And they sell that locally, kind of everywhere. And then they send all this other stuff just around Europe, and people go nuts for it. So it was everywhere in the UK when I was there, Levick, and it was a big name, and people were going really big for it. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, it was just like incredible to see the scale that they were doing these things on, and that was amazing as well. So I took a lot out of. I spent the day with them there, and I took a lot out of talking to Mike and Dave there, which was really cool as well. So that's cool.
Yeah. So you've obviously done a bit of travelling. You've seen how different breweries operate and the sorts of systems and processes they have in place.
Yeah.
What sort of innovations have you seen taking place in beer?
It was more innovations in the processes and the manufacture. So a lot of people tell you, like as I was saying before, beer becomes a style. You brew to that style. That's how you're meant to do it. But it's the way you get to the end product defines like how you've actually made your beer and if it's going to be good or not. Because like you can put all your ingredients in the tank and it can still not taste very good. It's just about how you actually string it all together. And yeah, the guys at Gypsy Hill were in Crystal Palace were absolutely unbelievable for their innovation. And that was mostly because they could build quite a lot. So they built a lot of things where I was just like, wow, I wonder if I could do that. I think I could do that. Should I do that? And I was just like, yeah, well, the reasons they were giving me behind it were pretty cool. And it was just ways to dry hop beers differently so that you could cultivate your yeast at the right temperatures, but still dry hop at a higher temperature to get a nice oil extraction. And these types of things to bring your fruitiness up in the beer, but still actually get healthy yeast out of your tank, which was quite incredible. I was like, wow, this is really, really, really cool. Same with, I did a trip to Beavertown whilst I was in the UK as well, which is one of my favourite breweries in the world, and they were doing the same thing. They were doing some pretty cool things, and it was mostly around getting their best flavours out of their hops, but also being able to keep the healthiest yeast possible. Okay. Which is a tough thing in beer because ideally, like if you're making hoppy beers, and both of these places are making quite hoppy beers, you want to add your dry hop in with the potential of the liquids to get up to a higher temperature so that you can get a nice oil extraction, therefore you'll get a higher fruity flavour as well. You get the higher flavours out of your hops, which could be piney, fruity, resin, citrus, whatever. But to get the yeast healthy, you can't really take the yeast out with the hops in the tank at the same time because you'll get hop flake in your yeast. And if you're trying to cultivate that yeast, it'll deteriorate quicker than it would if it was without it. So it doesn't actually make your yield of repitching yeast very good.
So what does it mean that the yeast is healthy? You say repitching. Is
that so yeast itself, it's a living organism. It's microbial. It grows quite rapidly, so it reproduces quite rapidly, and it reproduces by eating sugar, excreting CO2, the membrane. You don't ever want your membranes to split. I'm not going to get too technical on this, but essentially you want your yeast to be nice and healthy, eat its nutrients, eat its sugar, create its alcohol, create its CO2, but also reproduce quite healthily. If it has deterring factors for that, so it could be lots of things, and it happens in a lot of beers, and people don't even know that's what's happening. So, and that can be, it's a contributor to a lot of defects in beer. It is unhealthy yeast. It's in itself, it needs to be healthy to make it live a long lifespan or extra lifespan. So you have generations of yeast. So if you put fresh yeast into a tank and it goes through a fermentation, we call that, it's phase 1. And then the next time you pitch it, it's the second generation, and then the next is the third, the fourth, the fifth. The thing is, if you start getting to fourth and fifth, there's more defected yeast in there. So the health of the yeast starts to deteriorate quicker because there's more defective yeast reproducing. And if the yeast itself has already had intermittent factors in there to make it deteriorate quicker, and you're still trying to repitch on fourth and fifth generations, it could be already not good.
So what if you want to get a second generation yeast, but you haven't kept it? Or like, how do you keep it? Or how do you
It's really hard to do. You've got to keep it. You've got to store it yourself, and that's one thing in Australia that not a lot of people do enough of. In the bigger breweries, they do. They say they have their house strains, like Carlton. Say they've had their house strain for like 85 years or something crazy. In the general, the small scale beer market in Australia, they haven't really gone into using wet yeast that much and propagating that yeast and keeping it alive and culturing it and adding it on for a second and third and fourth generation. It helps cost-wise dramatically, but the effort of keeping it alive and the processes you have to go through actually are a bit more difficult. You need to go through a bit more microbial training, using microscopes, these types of things. But it's actually not that hard. Like you need a separate fridge for your yeast. You need a microscope and you need some slats. That's really about all you need to make sure it's healthy and alive. And then it's just a matter of you managing how to keep it alive. So you want to take it out of the tank, give it a nice wash with some clean beer or clean wort. You don't want the wort to be like fermenting, but a nice wash with it, keeping it alive, and then store it safely so that it'll stay nice, dormant, alive, but not active. And then you can put it into a tank where there's beautiful maltose sugar from your malt that you brewed, and it'll come back alive and start eating sugar for you. And so that's how it works. But yeah, it's in Australia, people are starting to develop their techniques a bit more, which is really good. It's something that is huge in the US, the UK, Europe in general, and just because of I don't know if it's the techniques or people just not knowing enough about it down here in Australia, but it's been a bit lackluster so far. People just using the powder stuff, which is great, but if you can use like the really nice fresh wet yeast and keep cultivating, you'll save yourself money, but you also start making a lot better beer.
So what is it that you guys are doing differently at your new joint? Actually, we should speak about that a little bit. What can you tell us about that?
So for us ourselves, we want to be using the freshest ingredients possible. We don't really want to be stuck down by a stigma of making the five of the same beers over and over and over again. For us, it's all about exploring and evolving what we're doing and what the business and what the industry is doing itself. So for us, we want to be able to create beer in a space where we can have an influence that doesn't have to influence the general beer style or market itself. So for us, it's about making beer that we really want to drink, but at the same time, people that we know love beer want to drink as well, and doing it well. Being meticulous about what we do in our processing, in our manufacture, in the use of our ingredients, and even the selection of those ingredients is a huge thing for us at the moment. We're just doing pilot batches, where things are in the later stages, where our big tanks are on the way, but just doing pilot batches, we're still doing the same things. We're playing around with some stuff, we're working on some different things, but at the same time, we just want to make beers that stand up to what they're meant to be, but also don't have to be tied down by making the same thing all the time. We believe that the market here in Australia is going to be ready for that, but also, we've got to make good beer to make it successful as well. The other thing we really like to work on in our brewery and in what we're doing with our business is actually we focus a lot on the business side. We focus a lot on the marketing and strategic side of things, and that's something that I believe a lot of breweries miss in Australia. So Matt Kierkegaard said it in his talk with you, that a lot of people in the industry think that they can make a good beer and it just sells. That's just not how it works. Like, you can make the best beer in the world, but if you don't know how to sell it, no one's going to drink it. That's unfortunately the way it is. And to a lot of people, that's disheartening and that's disappointing. But at the end of the day, it's business and it's a business industry. So if you aren't focusing on your business as much as you are your beer that's being made and your marketing that's getting done, you're losing out. And that's a big thing that we like to work on.
Yeah, well, it's like 50-50 product and commercialization.
Yeah, exactly right.
And
it's probably more marketing than it is beer, to be honest with you. Like, in my experience, I would say it's more marketing and business than the beer making itself.
it's something that I'm personally passionate about myself, because coming from a business background, that's what I love. So I love hearing about different entrepreneurs and their journey with business and the industry, and I find a lot of people in the industry are incredibly passionate about product, but then they don't have that business acumen to take it to market. And I think, so I agree with you that ad is something that's lacking.
Yeah, definitely, man, definitely. You know, there's guys that come along and you sit there and go, wow, those guys are so successful. Why are they doing that? But if you have a closer look, it's actually not doing too many different things. They're just doing what they do really well and they're focusing on the right areas. Bolter is one of those places that I speak highly of to anyone. Scotty Hargrave and Brian Kisfon Solly down there are good friends of mine, and like, I'll be biased, like they make really great beer and they always have. All in my experience with them, they have. But at the end of the day, if you look at Bolter beer, it's iconic now, because you look at their branding, you look at their marketing strategy, look at their businesses themselves, and you go, well, like, they're very smart with everything they do. Every single thing they do is very smart and well thought out, and it's good processing, but it's also a good product at the end of the day as well. And that's a great thing. Everything has to accent everything else for it to be a successful product. And there's not too many people in Australia that I'll say are nailing that 100%. So, what
would you say is your number one industry resource on your journey?
Resource, like, for myself that I pull from?
Yeah, could be book, industry, book, website person.
Yeah, okay. So I'm very, very fortunate enough to have worked with a lot of really talented brewers. And I learn better hands-on. That's just me. Like, that's the way I do things. I've read a lot of books as well, and in this industry, a lot of it is you've got to help yourself, and you've got to stick it out and get in there and do some work, and that's the way you learn. And that's how I learned. So I used to run Archive Beer Boutique. Used to run their company also. Tells used to be their operations manager. So I used to have to run four venues at once, do the operations. But every Friday, graciously enough, the guys at Green Beacon let me come in there, and they used to brew a 50-litre pilot batch every Friday called their New Brew Friday. And I used to come in every week and volunteer for 6 hours to learn how to make beer, because that's what I wanted to do. I was like, well, I'm going to learn how to do this. So I went there every week, and I got to work with Morgan and Johan, and this is when the guys were just starting out there. They weren't a big name, they hadn't won any awards, they weren't anyone. But these two guys helped me dramatically. And Morgan has since left just recently. He's moved back to Scotland, to Scotland with his partner. But Johan is their head brewer, and in my opinion, one of the best brewers in Australia. And I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of work and a lot of talk with him, and he's influenced me probably the most. But then I got to spend a lot of time at Stony Wood as well, a bit over here at Stony Wood. I got to run their cellar door when it first opened in Byron Bay. But what happened then was I went there when they shifted to their larger scale brewery, and what was left was one brewer working in Byron Bay, and that was it. So there was just one brewer there, and they had a couple of guys that did their packaging and kegging and stuff like that for them, but they were casuals. They didn't work for the company, like, so to speak, in the capacity that I did. So what I would do every day was come in and work with the brewer and be their assistant every single day, and then do my job at the same time. And it was just the man hours I put in. Like, some days I'd work 14 hours a day, and I'd be like, I don't care, because I'm learning. Like, I'm learning something that I can keep here. And thanks to those guys down there, like Brian was there when I was there, who's gone to Bolton now, but Tommy O'Reilly now works for Sunlight Liquor down in South Australia, and Kirk McGregor, he's working in logistics at Stonewood still. There's so many people, like Luke Rutland, who now does their cider for Granite Belt Cider Co. Zach Wright, who now left the company and started his own bar in Burleigh Heads. Like, there's all these guys that I got to work with every single day, and it was just like, wow, this is really bloody cool. Like, this is awesome. These guys are so smart, and I'm just absorbing knowledge off them.
So where can people go if they don't have these people in their lives? Where can people go to learn more about beer or brewing?
Yeah, it's really quite hard, and it's a tough thing. Like, the Institute of Distilling and Brewing has a degree that you do, and you can get a degree in brewing, and you get certificates. You can do a degree, you can do a master's. Masters, you have to have 7 years minimum experience as a professional brewer to actually try that course. It's going to be a very hard course one day. But yeah, like it's quite hard. I suggest people actually just take it up at home by themselves, and if they want to learn, reach out and talk to people. Pro Brewer is a forum on the internet based in America, where I've learned a mountain of stuff, and it's legitimately, it's just a forum. Like, you can ask people questions, and you could get the head brewer of Stone Brewing in America, and they could answer you. You don't know, like, some stuff like that happens. It's crazy, and that's a great one. But also reading. For anyone that likes to read and wants to learn about brewing, I would definitely recommend reading the yeast, water, malt, hops books. You get them pretty easy. The yeast one, if you really want to learn, like, the background of what making really good beer is it's a tool that I use every day, and every single brewery that you go to, these guys will have that book. They'll have read that book, because it is very, very important. There's lots of different things, but at the end of the day, like, if you want to get hands-on experience, it's about putting your hand up to go in somewhere and just ask, like, can I be here for this? And sometimes they might say no, and that happens, but at least you're trying. Like, take it on yourself to learn what you can by yourself. So I definitely recommend getting your own homebrew kit, even if it's just like the normal Cooper stuff. If you're just going to learn like that smallest bit about it, that's fine. But at the end of the day, you've really got to push yourself to learn a bit more and find ways to do it. Otherwise, it won't happen. I know for myself it wouldn't happen if I didn't do it. And I say that to everyone all the time, that it's the man hours that I put in, the effort that I put in when I was a bit younger, that actually got me to here today, and I'm able to do the things that I can do. And I'm starting a brewery at 27. It's freaking awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. So after going through all that learning and your training that you've gone out of the way to do, and your own education, you will have overcome a lot of challenges, obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, what's your biggest challenge?
So it's still learning for me now, like still learning and developing. And there's going to be hiccups when this brewery first commissions, and it's about that, getting through that in the best way possible, but learning from it. Asking questions is a big one of everyone in the industry. I always sit there and say, people always say, "Oh, I didn't know if I should ask that question." I always sit there and it's like, there's no dumb questions, only questions you didn't ask. Because you might think something's dumb, but it might be just a perfectly normal question to ask. So asking questions, learning from it, evolving myself from other people in the industry, but also myself learning, and then taking the processes that I have learned at other places and my own, and then putting them into practice in the near future and making good quality beer. That's my number one goal, is just to make good quality beer and make people happy drinking it. Love it. So my final wrap-up question for you today is, what's next for Mitchell Pickford? Getting this brewery going. So yeah, the next thing is start breaking ground, hopefully in the next month, on our brewery itself, on the build of the brewery. So that's a really big role for me. I have a lot of say in all of that, in design and manufacture, in the actual space itself, because at the end of the day, I'm going to be the main person using all the tools. So therefore, I should be the one to specify how they're done, how they're set up. So that's my next thing is, we're working on this project to get it up and running, but also, I've got to make it work the best way I want it to. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the show today, Mitch. It was awesome having a chat with you. Awesome. Pleasure's all mine. Cheers.
Enjoy the episode? Like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram to stay in the loop at Hospopreneurs. Want to be a part of the show or know a hospopreneur? Send us an email, hospopreneurs@gmail.com. Interviewing creative and innovative minds in hospitality. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.